other plane hijackings or perhaps other terrorist operations?
I'm not prepared to make comments about any other items at this time.
Do you have any determination about where the plane crash in Somerset County might have been?
I missed
Lou Walters with Natalie Allen at CNN Center. We've just received some astonishing news from Martin Savage, who is at the scene of the rescue and recovery effort in Lower Manhattan. 5 rescue workers have been found in the wreckage of the Twin Towers. They are all alive. Martin Savage, are you with us?
Lou, I can hear you. Can you see and hear me?
I can. 5 found alive?
That's correct. Let me tell you, they have been hoping for miracles here as they have been digging for 2 days, and it appears that's exactly what has happened. According to rescue workers that have been coming out, as well as medical personnel, 5 firefighters have now been found alive. This is the remarkable circumstances under which that discovery was made. They were making an all-out attempt to find survivors today, removing debris. They found a vehicle, an SUV, that had been buried under tons of debris. When they cleared the debris away, they opened the door, and much to their amazement, 2 of those firefighters were able to get out on their own. The other 3 are said to also be all right. They were taken out. All 5 are alive and well. It is a most remarkable discovery, and you can imagine the sense of elation it is sent through those that are searching for further survivors. Again, the 5 were inside an SUV that apparently became entrapped when the buildings came down. They were found 2 days later alive. Lou?
That's astonishing. Martin, was there any indication that there was still life beneath the rubble, or was this just an occasional discovery?
Well, we have noticed today, first of all, it is an all-out effort that is going on. The activity here, as far as the number of volunteers that have been parading by literally in columns, is well over 1,000. We know that this is the big push day. They realize the time is running short. Weather's also a problem. They know it's going to rain tonight. They are making preparations for that, covering the equipment. They want to get any of the survivors out that can be found today, if at all possible. They also realize that if there are survivors to be found, they're probably going to be found underground. That apparently was the case. The SUV was discovered, and inside, the prayers of at least 5 families were answered.
Where are we now in the rescue and recovery operation, Martin? Unlike Oklahoma City, where we could see the inexorable damage and the horror of the rescue and recovery effort, we're not able to see it here, so we have to depend on people like you to describe it to us.
Well, essentially what is going on right now, I'm beside the West Side Highway here, is one of the main corridors in for the emergency equipment. All day long it has been bumper to bumper with emergency equipment, with earth-moving trucks, with tractor trailers, with all sorts of equipment that is vitally needed. The sidewalks, in the meantime, have been the avenues in for the hundreds of firefighters, the iron workers that have been coming in that are working to cut away the tons of steel that are overlying the areas where they believe that there are survivors. There were reports this morning still of cellular telephone calls coming in from people who may be down below. They are trying to ascertain where they are. But keep in mind, the 110 stories that were the Twin Towers have now been reduced to a rubble pile that measures about 100 feet. It's very unstable. There are firefighters that are working with harnesses, ropes, and ladders, as well as other experts trying to get in there and not shift the pile. At the same time, when they do move it, in some respects, there have been steam pipes that have been ruptured. They know there's a danger, Lou.
All right, Marty Savage in Manhattan. We will be getting back to you, of course. The headline is 5 New York rescue workers found alive inside an SUV buried beneath the rubble of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. We'll continue to follow that story as well as how these people managed it for the 2 days beneath the rubble. Right now we're going to check in on the a motion that has come from the White House today from President Bush and others. John King is in Washington and joins us with the First Lady. John?
Well, Lou, I'm in the White House map room in the basement of the White House residence, as you mentioned, joined by a very special guest, the First Lady of the United States, Laura Bush. Mrs. Bush, thank you for taking time with us. We know this is a very busy and trying time. In this moment of despair, I guess the country very much looking for miracles, I'd like to ask you something our Martin Savage in New York just reported. Your reaction. 5 firefighters or rescue workers apparently found still alive in the rubble of the World Trade Center.
Well, that's what everyone's praying for in our country, is that we can find as many people alive as possible. And I'm so thrilled to hear that some people have been found alive.
A rough emotional period for the country as well as for the President and yourself. You just returned to the White House from visiting some of the injured in the Pentagon attack at the Washington Medical Center. Can you tell us about the scene there, your thoughts, and anything you may have said to those injured?
Well, these were the people who were burned at the burn center at the Washington Medical Center. A lot of them are military or are civilians who are working at the Pentagon. Their families all surrounded them. The staff there in the burn unit at the Washington Hospital is wonderful. We visited with the doctors, we visited with all the families, we saw the patients, and most of them are doing quite well. A number of them, of course, are still on ventilators from smoke inhalation, so they couldn't speak, but they could blink at us, and their families were surrounding them with love. And I told each one of them, and I know what I said was right, and that was that every single American is praying for them. And I think they were comforted by that.
You are the First Lady of the United States, but you are also a parent, and you are a former school librarian. I understand you have sent a letter to school superintendents around the country today asking them to take a little time to speak to the children, and you think parents should do that as well. Explain your thoughts on that.
Well, I actually sent a letter to children, to the letter for elementary school children and a letter for junior high and high school students, and asked the school superintendents to distribute that letter to the schools in their state. I want students to know that everyone in our whole country reassures them that they're going to be taken care of, that they're going to be safe. I know that as all of us deal with our own emotions that have to do with this tragedy, we need to be very careful about our children. We know that our children are suffering from the same sadness and the same feelings of fear and confusion that adults are. And so I hope that parents will really pay very close attention to their children, to be honest with their children about their own feelings, but also to reassure their children that they're going to be there for them and that they'll be taken care of.
Your thoughts on, I assume both you and the President have spent some time watching these harrowing images, commercial jetliners flying into the World Trade Center. Your own thoughts on seeing these pictures and then the devastation caused by these attacks?
Well, and that's one thing I want to say to parents, and that is don't let your children see these pictures over and over. Try to protect your children from these pictures of destruction, especially your young children, but even elementary school age children shouldn't watch this all the time. I think it's too frightening for them, and so I hope parents will turn off the television and think of something constructive to do with their children. Children want to help, just like all the adults around here. They want to know what they can do. Adults can give blood. Children can't because of their age, but children can make red, white, and blue ribbons for their friends to wear to school. They can write letters to their own fire departments and their own police departments in honor of the lives of the firemen and the policemen whose lives were lost in New York. They can figure out other ways. I heard this morning that one child was saving their pennies to send to the dependents of the firemen who were lost in New York. So if we can figure out constructive ways so that our children can feel constructive, but also ways that we can have a relaxed and calm atmosphere in our homes. Children are reassured by routine, so if everyone just keeps up their same routine, shares meals with their children and reads bedtime stories to them, and in a time like this, even older children might want to sit in the evening with their parents and listen to a story read by their mother or their dad.
Can you share with us your thoughts at the very moment this happened? You were on Capitol Hill. You were supposed to testify at a Senate committee hearing. The Secret Service comes up to you and says, Mrs. Bush, there's been a terrorist attack. We need to rush you to a secure location.
Well, like everyone else, I knew knew before I got in the car about the first plane, and of course at that point we weren't sure it was a terrorist attack. We just didn't know if it was some accident. But then I was with Senator Kennedy and Senator Judd Gregg when we got the news about the second plane, and we were watching it on television. I was not frightened for myself. I was, like every American, concerned about everyone who was in the World Trade Center, and also so unbelievably saddened that something like this would happen in our country. and that the disregard for life of the people who did this was so profound that they would harm people who were going about their daily lives. And, it's a terrible, terrible tragedy, and I know that I speak for everyone when I say that we're praying for every single person who's directly impacted by this tragedy.
The country, indeed the world, watching your husband at this moment. He has been President of the United States for 8 months now. This, by far, the biggest crisis he has faced, perhaps the biggest crisis any president has faced in quite some time. Take us a bit, if you will, into how he deals with crisis. Just this morning in the Oval Office, we saw on the one hand a steely resolve, if you will, of we will find those accountable, yet a few minutes later he was tearing up himself as he talked about the toll this has taken on the families. How does your husband, when we don't see him, when he's over in the residence with you at night, how does he deal with these things?
Well, my husband is very resolved. He's got a lot of discipline. He has all of his life. He has a lot of strength of character. He also is very caring about people. And in all the stories that we've heard today on the news, now today's news have the stories, thank God, about people being found, but also the stories about people who are looking for their loved ones and have no idea where they are or if they'll ever find them. Those stories touch his heart. They touch my heart. I know they touch every American's heart. But he has a very firm resolve, and he also has a lot of confidence about our country. That we're not going to be brought to our knees by something like this, that everyone, Americans are standing shoulder to shoulder. Just then, when we drove to the Washington hospital, all the people who were standing out on the streets were waving flags and giving the president the thumbs up. And I know in New York, I heard that as the relief workers drive in with their dump trucks and everything into the site of the World Trade Center, that people are applauding on the streets. And people really want to help, and they really want to be able to thank all those people who are working to find victims.
And finally, let me ask you, in your view and in your conversations with the president, how has this changed the country permanently? We obviously see more security. The airports are more open today. But how much freedom, if you will, do you think Americans will have to give up now in the name of security? I mentioned just as one example, in a Pentagon briefing a short time ago, the Undersecretary of Defense saying matter-of-factly that there have been combat air patrols flying over Washington and other major cities in the United States in recent days. Has this transformed us forever?
Well, I don't know about that. I certainly hope not. But I also think that people are very willing to be inconvenienced when they have to wait in a line now in an airport or something else, that now they certainly are more than willing to do that. I don't think we'll have to give up a lot of freedom. I certainly hope not. I mean, that's what makes our country so special, are our freedoms. I do know that Americans now realize that we can't take our freedoms for granted. Before, maybe we did a little bit, but now all of us really value the freedoms that we have and the many, many blessings we have to live in this great country more than ever.
We know these are trying times for both you and the President. We thank you for your time today,
John.
joining us here in the White House, the First Lady of the United States, Laura Bush.
Great.
Now back to Aaron Brown in New York.
Thanks.
John, thank you. Mrs. Bush, thank you both. We seize when we can on good news and hopeful signs. And as we told you earlier, 5 firefighters have been found alive in Lower Manhattan. CNN's Martin Savage joins us now. Marty, what can you tell us?
Your number. No one would tell me a number.
But they're alive.
That's what they're saying.
We're just
Marty,
trying to verify the information that we have received now from 2 different sources. I'm sorry, as we were trying to verify, in fact, what is appearing to be an amazing discovery and certainly a heartfelt one. And that is, a short while ago, while they were clearing the debris, and there is a very frantic search that is going on right now, a full-out effort, they reportedly uncovered a SUV that belonged to the New York City Fire Department. And when they uncovered it and opened the doors, 2 firefighters stepped out, and 3 others that are inside are also said to be okay. That would be a total of 5 firefighters. That is coming to us from a medical person who was on scene, and also one of the rescuers who said he talked to the firefighters. They are said to be in good shape, considering the fact that their vehicle would have been buried and they were living in it for 2 days. Now, this obviously would only refuel the efforts to find survivors. If you find 5, perhaps there are more such miracles that are waiting out there. So word is spreading quickly through the rescue community here of what appears to be a miraculous discovery. and the efforts are now to try to find more people. But again, apparently this vehicle was parked outside of what we think was maybe the North Tower or Tower 1 of the World Trade Center, somehow managed to survive despite the collapse of the building. And the remarkable discovery was made 2 days later. Again, reporting 5 firefighters said to have just been pulled out alive. Back to you.
Martin, just stay with me for a second, and I apologize if I know you're trying to report this. Can you give me a sense of how close to the building they were? Do you know that?
No, I don't know specifically. Obviously, they would have been among those that responded sometime after either the first crash or the second,
Right.
but before the building collapsed. The exact location in reference to the building is also hard to ascertain simply because the geography down there is so remarkably different than it was 2 days before.
And have the people you've been talking to been able to give you any indication of how much rubble was around this SUV, how deeply these 5 New York firefighters were buried?
No, they have not. Again, this information is just sort of rippling out from ground zero.
I
it is
understand.
clear. We have been told that there were no survivors that were above ground, that they had been carefully checking through with cadaver dogs. Perhaps the fact that these people were sealed inside a car could have made a difference, or inside a vehicle, or perhaps the fact that they may truly have been buried. We don't know how deep, Aaron.
Okay, Marty, why don't you go and just keep reporting the story, and we'll check back with you as you come up with new information. Over at the Justice Department, CNN's Kelly Arena has been working on the investigative side of this, and Kelly joins us now. Kelly, what do you have right now?
Aaron, we just heard from Attorney General John Ashcroft and FBI Director Robert Mueller about the ongoing investigation. They say that they have gotten thousands of tips that they are pursuing, that they have identified at least 18 hijackers. They said 2 planes had 5 hijackers, the other 2 had 4 hijackers each. They do say that they have several people that have been detained. Now, here's how that's working. The FBI investigators are headed out trying to establish links to the hijackers that they do have information on, trying to find associates, friends, people who may have some connection. When they go to interview these people and they ask for proper identification, in many cases there are INS violations, and so as proper procedure is followed, those people are detained. We've also been told by several FBI sources that in some cases some people have been arrested, not on charges directly related to this investigation, but on other state and local charges. So there have been several people detained. How many? Not really important at this point, Aaron, because that number keeps fluctuating. While the FBI may think that they have useful information, many of these so-called witnesses are released after some time because they simply have nothing to offer. Another thing that the FBI said is that on the human level here, and Justice Department says that they are trying to streamline the process of getting funds to victims' families, benefits, death benefits, and so on. So they are working as hard as they can to put more staff on the scene and to streamline the administrative process so that that money starts flowing a lot quicker than it normally does. As for the extent of this investigation, the FBI had previously told us that they had as many as 4,000 agents and 3,000 other support personnel on the case. We are now told that they have upped that number and included many more offices. Earlier in the day, I had spoken to the FBI. They said as many as 20 of their overseas offices are now engaged directly in this investigation. So this is just taking on mammoth proportions in terms of the number of resources that are going into trying to establish exactly who did this. Aaron, I caution against trying to establish any links at this point. There have been many reports out there trying to attach these hijackers to one organization or another. Sources do tell us that they are just not there yet. These organizations are very hard to link together. Sometimes there is no link. People act independently on their own as groups. So I caution against targeting, and as did the Attorney General, cautioned against any violent act toward Arabs living in this country or Arab Americans. Aaron?
Kelly, thanks. Kelly Arena is covering the investigative side out of the Justice Department. Back to Atlanta. Natalie, good afternoon.
Aaron, we thank you. As we get word that airports are beginning to reopen in this country, we have pictures right here. This is the first international flight that has now landed back in the United States since the terrorist attack. This is an Alitalia flight that has just arrived in from Canada with more than 100 people aboard, people who have been stranded in Canada, holed up there until they received word that this airplane could take off and land in the United States. The first airliner that has landed back since this attack. And as you can imagine, more airplanes are beginning to take off as more airports adhere to new, stricter safety guidelines. For more on that story, let's go to our correspondent Miles O'Brien, who joins us here in the studio. Miles.
Natalie, I don't know if we're going to see the picture of those people disembarking from that aircraft, but I suspect a few of them might kiss the ground now that they have arrived back in the United States. I've heard tales. I have, for example, a member of my family who's a flight attendant for Delta. She has been stuck in Gander, Newfoundland all this time awaiting a scene like this one, and I'm sure she'll be able to do that very shortly. Let's take a look at the FAA's website for just a moment. FAA.gov is the place to go. If you want to find out what airports are open right now, the airports that have certified themselves to be up to snuff, if you will, under the new guidelines. A bunch of airports here, a lot of smaller sized ones. I'm not going to go through them all. I've underlined some of the biggies. Atlanta, of course, is a big one. Buffalo, BWI, Baltimore, Washington, Cleveland. EWR is Newark Airport, IAD, Dulles Airport. Some of these we've been telling you about, but just to confirm it, JFK, of course, is John F. Kennedy Airport. LaGuardia open. MCO is Orlando. That's a big airport. Memphis is big. That's Federal Express country, and that's important that that's open. Miami, St. Louis, and Tampa. But notable for being not on this list, Boston, BOS, not on there still. DCA, that's Reagan National Airport. DFW, huge airport, of course, Dallas-Fort Worth. ORD is O'Hare Airport, busiest airport in the world. Denver, not on the list as well. LAX. Los Angeles, still shut down. SFO, San Francisco, also one of the intended destinations of those high-deck flight, not open as well. Detroit, DTW, big hub for Northwest Airlines, is not open. SEA, Seattle. A lot of airports that are still closed. So as we tell you that this system is back up and running, it is getting back up and running in fits and starts because of the fact that these airports need to certify to the FAA that they have met the requirements for this added level of security. So it's going to take some time before the system is up and running as we're used to have it up and running. And I guess that goes for an awful lot of things in this country right now. Natalie?
And Miles, no doubt the phones are jammed with people trying to check on their flights and any tickets they were holding. What can people expect now as they head back to the airport to try and take a flight, as far as how much longer it will take them to get through and just what they can look at as far as security measures?
Well, it occurs to me that I suspect on some of the shorter flights that people are accustomed to, it might be simpler just to get in your car and drive. Given the amount of time it will take to deal with the extra layers of security, the additional questions, the more frequent physical searches, all of that is going to increase your time. No curbside check-in. All of that will add up to more time and more inconvenience for airline customers. So I suspect you could immediately think of pretty much doubling the amount of time you bookmark for arrival at the airport. And that obviously has a ripple effect. That might make many people decide to get in a car. And certainly these airlines dealing with what appears to be a softening economy, potentially maybe a recession we've been talking about, this couldn't come at a worse time for them.
Absolutely. Let's switch tracks just for a moment, Miles. You've been reporting on the Pennsylvania airliner crash, and we have just heard today that debris from that crash has been located miles and miles away from the crash scene. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I had a feeling you might ask me about that. So let me just bring up this flight track, if you will. This is based on FAA radar data, and this is the flight of United Airlines Flight 93, which all the way up until it got to Cleveland appeared to be on its way to San Francisco, SFO, and then took this very, very sudden turn here. The transponder went off and made its way toward the Baltimore-Washington area, but ultimately, as we know, crashed here. Now, what happened? We haven't been able to determine, but we have a little bit of circumstantial evidence. First of all, yesterday we discovered that the passengers on board the plane, through phone calls to their families, had made the decision based on the knowledge that other planes had been hijacked, and they knew that one of the planes had gone into the World Trade Center. In a sense, they knew they were destined for something along those lines, made the decision to try to attack the hijackers. Now, we don't know exactly what happened next. We do know it did crash into that rural field, and we also know today that there is another debris field between 2 and 6 miles to the north of that crash site. What does that mean? That means something fell off the airplane before it crashed. There's no question about that. What could have caused that? Perhaps a small explosion might have caused a piece of the aircraft to fall off. The people who were on the plane who called their family members said that the 3 hijackers had a red box which they say contained a bomb. We don't know that for a fact, but that is one possibility. Another possibility is there was some sort of struggle on that plane which caused the plane to go into some very steep and rapid bank maneuver, which would have increased the G-forces or the load on the wings, for example, might have caused an engine to fall off if it was that much of a rapid type of maneuver. And one other thought comes to mind. If I were a passenger on that flight and I wanted to thwart the effort of a hijacker to reach a destination which you might fear it might be headed, what I would do is I would open up an emergency door. Rapid decompression of that airplane would not make it to its destination. This is all in the level of speculation, but these are 3 areas to think about and look at as they continue to look in that debris field, and now this second debris field 2 to 6 miles away. Natalie?
Miles, thank you. And again, the Attorney General Ashcroft saying they believe the black box will be found from that location today. And of course, we have these incredible cell phone calls, as we've heard loved ones calling their family from that plane to tell them what kind of situation they are in. We do want to make one clarification. We did have pictures of the first international flight landing back in the United States at Los Angeles International. Miles reporting that that airport was not open yet. So we're not sure if that airport is open to outbound traffic, but we can confirm that one flight has landed back there today. Luke?
The most astonishing news in the past few minutes is the discovery of rescue people, firefighters, New York firefighters, found alive in the rubble alongside the collapsed debris of building number 1 of the World Trade Center. The 5 were discovered inside a sport utility vehicle that had been parked there. They have been pulled from the rubble and been taken to, we believe, St. Vincent's Hospital. We are parked outside there to at least verify they're at that hospital, be able to follow the progress of their survival. And we're hearing not only about stories of survival today, but of the heroism involved in this attack on the United States, including the fact that Thomas Burnett, who placed 4 telephone calls to his wife from that plane that Miles O'Brien was just telling you about, saying that he and others were going to attempt to do something. They knew about the other attacks by the other airliners and knew that they probably would be next. So Mr. Burnett's wife, Dina, is now telling authorities that her husband phoned her against her best judgment and wishes. He said that he and others were going to do something aboard that plane. We have Jim Dent with us now as we get into this matter of change in security.
CNN.
Jim, can you hear me?
Yes, I certainly can.
Okay, Jim Dent, we're going to talk about these new security measures that have been implemented at airports that have been certified to go ahead with resuming operations if they stringently comply. I want to go over a couple of them with you. One of them is a thorough search and security check of all airplanes and airports before passengers are allowed to enter or board aircraft. That would seem to me to be a security measure that I thought was in effect the whole time.
No, this is one of the new ones, and actually this is one of the better ones that they've just implemented. I would highly recommend that they do something like this.
So
yes,
what does that mean exactly?
Well, what it would mean is that somebody would come on board the airplane and they would check all the seat back pockets, they would check the overheads behind all the pillows, check all the compartments that are closed to make sure nothing is in there. Look underneath all the seats and make sure somebody hasn't planted something on the airplane that could be retrieved later.
So something has not been left behind by a passenger on an incoming flight.
That's absolutely right.
Okay, now a total ban on knives. I did not know before that knives were not banned. However, I have ridden in first class only occasionally and noticed we're using steak knives on the meat in first class. They also have been banned. Prior to this, blades shorter than 4 inches had been allowed. No more knives aboard aircraft. That's good.
Yeah, that's another thing that I think was long overdue. it was always the standing joke amongst the flight crews and everything else is that they allow steak knives on the plate. We never quite understood that, but it's one of those things that I think is a good idea, especially in light of what's happened.
Of course, we know from the evidence that's been gathered so far that these hijackers used box cutters and razor blades embedded in plastic, as I understand it. Now, I don't know if that would have fallen under the purview of these new security precautions.
Probably not, and here again, it would be very tough to detect these sorts of items. One of the problems with the new regulations is that you cannot ensure 100% that any of the items that could be used in a hijacking or an attempt, a terrorist attempt like this, could be detected. It's just physically impossible.
A ban on curbside and off-airport check-ins. This has been banned before during emergencies when airports have been under intense security, but as a general rule, it had not been disallowed because it inconvenienced passengers. But that's no longer going to be the case.
That's true. They are going to stop the curbside check-in. This is going to be a really immense logistic problem for the airlines. You're talking a system that moves hundreds of thousands of people every day, and having those people check in at facilities, verifying their identity out at the ticket counters, checking in baggage. You're talking a huge logistical problem, not to mention a manpower problem.
Okay, we have that you just touched on it, prohibiting all but ticketed passengers with photo IDs from going past airport metal detectors. Passengers without baggage no longer able to go directly to the gate to get a boarding pass.
That is absolutely right. Here again, I think that you're going to have a huge logistical and manpower problem. Whether these last two items would do anything to prevent something that just happened to us, I'm not so sure that would occur, but anything that you can do to ensure the safety, of course, is important, but you also have to balance that with your capabilities and also the percentages of what this will do to protect the traveling public.
All right. A couple other mentions here. Closer monitoring of vehicles around airport terminals, of course. That's a no-brainer. An increased use of federal air marshals, more officers on duty at airports. On that score, there have been several suggestions about what to do in the future. A great number of people suggesting air marshals. Now, I don't know if this rule applies to air marshals aboard airplanes. It doesn't say specifically. How do you understand?
I believe it includes having actual air marshals on the airplanes. In the early 70s, of course, with all the hijackings to Cuba and so forth, this was a much publicized rule, and unfortunately it sort of slid by the wayside. I think having that information out there to the flying public and also to the factions that do these sorts of things is definitely going to be something that's going to hinder them in the future or let them consider some other venue rather than the air transportation system.
All right, Jim Dent, thanks so much. We're going to get a better idea of what the security measures are and how they may or may not be working in the next several days as America attempts to get back into the business of air travel, which will become much more difficult than it has ever been before.
It certainly will be.
Now back to Aaron Brown in New York.
Thanks. These are just more examples, of course, of how our lives are going to be changed by what's happened in New York and Washington. And another one here now as well. Our national security correspondent David Ensor joins us with talk of legislation that would change the rule of play for the CIA. David?
Well, that's right, Aaron. A senior congressional Republican tells me that the 1995 rules requiring that potential informants for the Central Intelligence Agency be vetted for their criminal or human rights records before they're taken on board will likely be abolished, whether it's by the Director of Central Intelligence or by legislation, which Congress is now planning to consider next week, is not yet clear. In that legislation, Congress is also looking at adding billions of dollars to the nation's counterterrorism effort, and they're talking with the administration now about the numbers and exactly what that money would be used for. There's also discussion on Capitol Hill of creating a position, sort of a counterterrorism czar who would report directly to the president, much as the drug czar does now. The 1995 rules were imposed after a CIA-paid informant was found to be responsible for the deaths of an American and also of a Guatemalan married to an American named Jennifer Harbury. She led the cause, saying that the U.S. should not be paying people money for information who are murdering people overseas. And a U.S. intelligence official has said that while anything aimed at bolstering the human intelligence gathering efforts of the United States is a good thing, in fact, these rules have never restricted the agency from hiring the people it wants to hire, from getting the informants it wants to get. Last year, CIA spokesman William Harlow said to me that, quote, "We have never turned down an opportunity to deal with someone, even someone with an unsavory background, if we thought that person could be helpful in our effort to combat terrorism." However, today we have word from someone that I know President Bush takes very seriously, takes advice from on these matters, former President George Bush Sr., himself a former CIA director.
If we are going to provide the president with the best possible intelligence, we have to have we have to free up the intelligence system from some of its constraints. You got to always respect the privacy and right of an American citizen. But I think they ought to take a hard look now at whether we've gone too far in denying the people that run the intelligence community access to human intelligence.
So again, Aaron, the 1995 rules set up by the director of CIA, under which people who might be hired as informants in terrorist groups have to be checked out first for their criminal or human rights record. Those rules may be soon about to go, just part of the fallout of the terrible incident on the 11th, Aaron.
David, I suspect any police officer anywhere in America will tell you that people who become informants often are unsavory characters, to use your words, in the same way that any prisoner will tell you you don't need a knife to make a knife. There are lots of ways to make a knife, and when we talk about these changes in air traffic safety and the like, it's a very fishy business. Is there any talk in Washington about changing the most basic rule of play for the CIA, and that is whether it can operate domestically in dealing with Americans here in this country?
Absolutely no discussion of that sort, no. I think that the CIA prefers to stay overseas. The FBI is happy handling the matters domestically. There are, however, some other questions that at least some on Capitol Hill are beginning to discuss. It may never reach the level of legislation, but questions about whether this country should have what most countries do have, a national ID system. It's something that most Americans would not like to see, and yet it is being raised as an issue at least. It would make it a lot easier to keep track of people who shouldn't be here or might have criminal records or ties to terrorist groups. Another issue that may be raised.
David, that's a really interesting one, because I know you and I have talked about this years ago. There was a fierce discussion when then President Clinton proposed as part of his medical plan, healthcare plan, that everyone in the country just get a national medical card. And people were very unhappy about that. The idea of a national ID card system, even in this moment, I suspect will strike some people as, you'll excuse the expression here, but un-American.
That's right. I don't think it's going to fly, but people in the anti-terrorism business are simply raising the issue and pointing out that we can have our liberties, or we can pay and we have to pay a price for them if we do. If you had that kind of a system, you might save some lives. Aaron?
David, thanks. CNN's David Ensor working the legislative national security side of the story. Just an update for those of you maybe just joining us. 5 New York firefighters, we believe they're New York City firefighters, have been found alive. They were in an SUV near the first of the World Trade Center towers. They've been pulled out. They are battered, but we are told they are okay. They're being checked on now. We continue some reporting on the circumstances of how they were found, how close to the buildings they were, how deeply they were buried in the rest. There are scores of stories truly about going on down there, about the rescuers and how rescuers are finding the people who are trapped. Earlier today, my colleague Paula Zahn talked to Pat Cobert about how one message was received, a pager message. Someone who was trapped managed to get a pager message out to a friend or associate in Canada. Here's a portion of that conversation.
Well, it was actually a call on my pager last night at 10:12 p.m. I went to bed about 9:45, listening to some of the news, and kind of fell asleep. And about 10:30, turned my TV off, and then heard my pager going off, and thought it was my brother Joe calling from Vancouver, as he did the night before at home. And I thought maybe instead of him calling tonight, being last night, he may have just paged me to call him back the next day. I called in, I heard this message, and it says, you know, we're under the rubble, we are okay, and it went on and then just ended. And I tried to go back to sleep, couldn't sleep. I got up, I listened to it 2-3 more times, tried to sleep again, I couldn't. I phoned the police. I waited for them to answer their phones. I guess they were busy. I didn't call on the 911 line. So I hung up and went back to sleep. I still couldn't sleep, and I listened to it again. I phoned the Metro Toronto Police, got through to them, spoke to a sergeant at headquarters. He listened to it, others listened to it. They sent police officers to my home last night to hear the tape, and they reviewed it. And he was on the line immediately with AT&T in the United States to try and track the phone number that came back to my pager last night. And you know, it was obviously very, very distressful and very, very sad and disturbing. It's been a long, long night for me.
I can't even begin to understand what that must have been like. Pat, for our viewers to get a better sense of why this was so disturbing, I think we're able now to play part of that message that was transmitted to you. Let's listen.
We're still alive. There's no trapped on the rumble half, but we're still alive. There's no.
Pat, about the only thing I could make out, because the sound was a little distorted, is I'm still alive, I'm still alive.
Yes, we are trapped under the rebel, and then he goes to we are still alive, and then goes on from that point. He sounded very calm, cool, collected, didn't sound like he was stressed. You know, kind of seems like maybe he's in a good protected area and a void in there, but there's definitely, because he changed it from to we, that there's more than one person in here, and obviously they are alive, and hopefully they can, you know, try and track this down through AT&T and find out who it was, or if somebody in the United States hears that voice, maybe it's one of their loved ones hears it and knows that that's his voice, that maybe they can get a cell phone and try calling him. We're really hoping.
That is absolutely amazing. Now, do you have any idea how your pager would have been run?
Well, Toronto,
how this number, you know, would have been accessible to somebody, or is it a common number that someone could have dialed?
Yeah, Toronto has a 416 area code. New York has 516. Upstate New York has 716. And the last 4 digits of my number is all the same. And it's a very easy first 3 numbers of it as well. I do business in New York, in New Jersey, around the world, and you know, I don't know, there's a lot of Canadians down there. I don't know if somebody was actually had my number, or if a business associate had called me on my pager and hit redial, as you know, somebody here might have suggested or something, or they just dialed at random last night.
That is a remarkable story, isn't it? And what I heard in listening to that message was the calm in the voice. We were a couple of hours ago, and we reported on this, involved in an evacuation from a building, and we were struck by how calm, I would say 99.9% of the people were, and people under pressure handled themselves pretty well. CNN's Martin Savage has continued to report on the rescue of 5 firefighters. Marty Savage, can you hear me?
Yes, Aaron, I hear you. And New York City police are now confirming to us that, in fact, that is the case. 5 firefighters have been pulled from the rubble alive, and reportedly 3 now, we're being told, 3 of those firefighters were fit enough that they were able to walk on their own. This is the story of their remarkable discovery. Apparently, there was a suspicious spot that the rescuers had been going over yesterday. They had marked it today they went back in earnest, and we must stress today is an all-out effort to find survivors. And when they were able to remove the debris, they uncovered what appeared to be the roof of a vehicle. Turns out it was the roof of a Chevy Suburban. They dug down even further and they managed to get open the doors, and you could imagine their amazement and pleasure when 2, and now we hear 3 of those firefighters were able to walk out on their own. So it has sent a jolt of electricity, getting those people once again reinvigorated. Not that they had lost any of their spirit, but obviously when you find so many bodies, to find 5 alive has sent a tremendous thrill, albeit over the fact that there are so many yet to be found. Aaron.
Well, the men and women working down there need every little piece of good news they can to get them through what they are going through. All of us who know about Oklahoma City know how horrible the experience is for the rescue teams, and any good news is great news to them. Marty, thanks for your work. Natalie.
Aaron, thank you. We wanted to switch you now quickly live to Los Angeles International Airport. These people are the first to arrive back in the United States. Our affiliate KCAL is interviewing people. Let's listen.
Getting on board the plane, and we can see if we can move up to this gentleman. Ms. Piazza, can we speak with us for just a moment? Sure. Were you a little nervous getting on this plane?
No, not at all.
Why not?
Security is very tight all over the world, I guess, or North America.
Was there a lot of security in Calgary?
Yes, there was. Yes, there was.
What were your thoughts when you didn't know why you were being diverted, correct?
No, not at first, not until we landed. Yes. I didn't believe it quite. Yes. Hard to believe. Let me see. Landed, going through customs. They made us go through customs. Yes, the volunteers were letting us know.
Are you happy that it worked out that way? I mean, do you think that was a good plan? What happened?
To divert flights? Yeah, sure, Protect the airways. Protect the airways over. My name's Sam Piazza.
Good. People having different reactions, and certainly not nervous about...
This, of course, live coverage. We'll continue to listen as this reporter live there at the gate where people are coming off this Italia jet are talking with reporters there about their experience. They have been in Canada for 2 days. As you heard that passenger say, they were told that the plane was being diverted 2 days ago. They didn't know why until they landed, and he could not believe it when he landed and was told what was happening in the United States. Thousands more passengers will be arriving back today and in the next few days as the airspace opens in this country. 150 flights had been diverted from Los Angeles International. They are due back over the next few days. We don't know how many people exactly will be coming back at that airport, and we still do not know if planes are outbound there at Los Angeles International. Miles O'Brien, our correspondent who's been checking on airports that are reopening today, was saying that planes had not begun to take off there. You see the airplane that has arrived from Calgary today, an Alitalia plane bringing very relieved Americans back home. The 2 that we heard interviewed saying they were not afraid at all to fly. They were just so relieved to be back home. And we'll still be checking other airports to see which ones will be opening today and which ones will still be staying closed as well. From around the world, there have been signs of solidarity with Americans. As you know, many outpouring of thoughts and prayers and symbolisms to show support for what people in this country have been going through. One came today at the Queen of England's official residence. Libby Weiner with Independent Television News has more now on a break from tradition in London.
The changing of the guard, a pageant normally performed mainly for tourists, was today transformed into a show of support for Britain's most important political ally. The American ambassador to London, William Farish, had been invited to attend the ceremony with the Duke of York. And in an unprecedented move, it was his country's anthem that was played first. Hundreds of Americans were gathered outside to listen as the band of the Coldstream Guards played the familiar tune. They then stood in silence as a mark of respect to the many thousands killed. The ambassador, who will meet the Queen tonight, was said to be deeply moved by her decision to hold this special ceremony today. Many visitors were also touched. The ceremony today is a powerful symbol of Britain's support for America. The Queen's decision to interrupt her holiday and return for a special service in London tomorrow, a sign of the royal family's awareness of the need to be seen to be standing side by side with the United States. Libby Vina, ITN, at Buckingham Palace.
Some of the most powerful stories here, there are stories of the rescues, and there are stories of those who managed to get out of those buildings. Among them, James Dory, an Australian, was working in the Trade Center on Tuesday. His story needs no words from us. All it requires is for you to listen to his tale.
There were mixed signals because over the loudspeaker we could hear World Trade Center number 2 is secure. Please be calm, World Trade Center 2 is secure. And I remember there was a carpenter or a tradesman of some description who had a two-way radio who said it was a plane that hit number 1, and everybody breathed a sigh of relief. Everybody pictured maybe a twin-engine Cessna hitting the building in mistake. And as soon as he said that, our building got rocked and it swayed like a leaf. And as I said, people fell over and fell on top of each other in a dark stairwell. And then the same guy, who I wish I could see him and thank him because he was a pillar of strength, he just started telling people that was the fuel tanks in the other building explode, and everybody believed it and kept going. And there were people screaming, but the majority of people were saying, it's one step at a time. And I'll never forget the piles of shoes at each turn because people were throwing off their shoes and leaving their bags behind, just trying to get out. And it was terror because you were still 50 levels in the air. But I had a northerly aspect from World Trade Center number 2. I saw the World Trade Center number 1 explode in front of me. I've got no idea of the time. I just knew that everybody on my floor was going crazy, and I had an instinct to find my way to a stairwell, which I did. As fortune has it, and as I now realise, I was in the northeastern stairwell. The second plane hit the southwestern stairwell. I wasn't too many floors down when it did hit. I got knocked down a couple of stairs, and you wouldn't wish it on anybody to see what was going on in there, but we dusted ourselves up and just kept going down the stairs, and I got my way to the bottom. My legs were burning up. Luckily, I stay rather fit, and people were helping each other down the final 30 flights, and I got out, and we just kept going. As I said, I'm thankfully quite fit and I'm young, and as I saw level 20 come up, there were people who were in a lot worse shape than me, and I was pulling people. I had girls' bags on my back. By the time we got to the bottom, I think I had 4 people around each arm just pulling them, and I was telling everybody, I promise you we're going to make it. I didn't believe it, but I thought if at least I could help some people out.
James Dorney, an Australian in the Trade Center on Tuesday, lucky to be alive today. There are more than 4,500 people still missing, which is keeping rescuers' efforts alive down at the Trade Center. They continue to work. Michael Oku is with one of those workers, and he joins us now. Michael.
Aaron, good afternoon. As you know, it is an absolutely beautiful day in New York, all the more striking because we are standing underneath this great plume of smoke emanating from what used to be the World Trade Center that has come to symbolize now the great pall that has descended over the city. I think lessened slightly, possibly because of the 5 firefighters who were found. And I'm in fact joined right now by Steve Simmons, not one of the rescue workers who found any of the firefighters, but he can give us a sense of what it is like to be toiling there every day for the past 48 hours. Steve, you are a volunteer rescue worker.
Right.
What is it like in the site?
I mean, it's really unbelievable. I rode down, late yesterday afternoon, and you knew what to expect. You had an idea what to expect when you got down there, but it was like nothing you could imagine. I mean, everything around the area was just completely, just destroyed, and it was just it was amazing how it looked down there.
What physically do you do in this rescue? Is there a lot of equipment used, or is it literally hand to hand?
It's just basically you're shoulder to shoulder with guys, passing buckets of debris, carrying stuff, lifting, intermittently you have a part of a plane, you've got a part of a building, and just handing it back and forth, just long lines, and it's just amazing people in the lines.
Now, you told me earlier, before we were on camera, that there are moments where sometimes everyone stops, that there's this sort of collective silence. Describe that for me. What exactly does that mean?
Well, what happened is, the general mood there was somewhat levity. Guys are trying to, the false bravado, trying to be really, hey, we're just at work, we're doing this. And then somebody would, they'd find a shoe, or they, maybe they thought they heard something, maybe a radio from somebody. And, just everyone just yelled for quiet. You have this whole hush come down, all the machinery would stop. And, if there was anything, you just see people just digging, just on their hands and knees, just digging away, trying to find anything. And, and then it's a few minutes later, it's back to the same, passing stuff along.
What, if anything, have you personally found, or your team of workers?
You find everything there. You find cell phones, you find shoes, you find some biological parts. Everything you can find, and anything that gives you the opportunity of any kind of hope, anything whatsoever, is just. But the people there, I met such amazing people. I rode down I'm just a local guy. I rode down, I'm an equity trader. And I got on the bus with a bunch of iron workers and construction workers, and I rode in with those guys, and they let me in. And these guys during this, on any given day, you pass on the street, I'm in a suit, they're in a tank top. There's no contact. On the bus, it's like, hey brother, let's go, let's dig in. And it's just this amazing resolve. I sat across from, when we were on the line, it was, you have guys from Massachusetts.
Steve, thank you very much. Congratulations on your work, and good luck to you.
Michael, thank you. I'm gonna interrupt you here. We're hearing reports that perhaps another building has gone down. John Voss is in the area. John, are you able to hear me? Okay, Michael, stay where you are. Okay, don't go away. We're trying to establish contact with John. John Voss, are you able to hear me? It's Aaron. Okay, we'll continue. We have a report of another building collapsing. We do hear in the background, and perhaps you can as well, a lot of sirens going on. It's always difficult to know. The truth is, since Tuesday, there have been a lot of sirens going on all over the city, certainly from Midtown down towards the Trade Center. Whether it is related to that or not, I cannot tell you. Michael, are you there?
Yes, I am, Aaron.
What are you hearing down there?
I haven't heard. You mean specifically having to do with buildings going down?
Have you heard anything or seen anything that helps us on that first?
Aaron, I can't hear you very well. It sounded like you made reference to the fact that there was a building that might have gone down. And I can tell you that what's been happening here, in fact, not only through Steve Simmons, but some of the other rescue workers that we've talked to, that they're actually taking parts of buildings down because they're so unstable. And they've been doing that in a variety of ways. They took a walkway that connected one building to another down just at some point early this afternoon. And they've been using everything from dynamite to sometimes literally knocking things down in order to make the place more stable and more secure so that they can continue with their rescue efforts. Aaron.
All right, Michael, thank you. Stay around here for a bit. We continue now to work on trying to verify a report that perhaps, we are not sure yet, but we are getting reports that another building may have collapsed in the area of the Trade Center. Our John Voss is, we are trying now to establish contact with him. We haven't been able to do that yet. Andrea Koppel is at the State Department. Andrea, I'll be honest, I don't know what you have, so why don't you just tell me?
Sure, Aaron. Secretary Powell just finished a press conference here at the State Department, and without explicitly naming Osama bin Laden and his network known as Al-Qaeda as the only suspect, is saying that they were the ones responsible for Tuesday's attacks, he came closer than any other Bush administration official to date in saying that they are one of the prime suspects. And let me just put this into context. You've been hearing us talk a lot in the last day or so about U.S. contacts, high-level contacts with Pakistan. Why is that significant? Well, because Pakistan is not only the neighbor of Afghanistan, where bin Laden and his network are believed to operate, but Pakistan is also the prime supporter. The U.S. has charged Pakistan with being one of the prime supporters of the network. And so Secretary Powell just moments ago said this is why. He explained this is why he and members of his team have been holding high-level discussions with the Pakistanis. Let's listen.
We're looking at those terrorist organizations who have the kind of capacity